Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perik Yud Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilum Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. The Mishnah discusses another case of a person standing in one domain while moving objects in a different domain. Lo ya'amod adam bereshut yachid v'yishteh bereshut harabim. A person may not stand in a private domain and lean forward to drink from a cup or pitcher that is in the public domain, bereshut harabim v'yishteh bereshut yachid, or stand in a public domain and lean forward to drink from a cup or pitcher that is in a private domain, because the commentaries explain he might unthinkingly bring the drinking utensil back into the domain where he is standing and be guilty of transferring from one domain to another. Although we learned in Mishnah 4 that one may stand in a private domain and move items in a public domain and vice versa, that's only where the object being moved is not needed in the domain where he is standing. There is therefore little risk that he will bring it back into that domain. Our Mishnah, on the other hand, deals with a cup or pitcher which a person needs in the domain in which he is standing. So in this case, the rabbis were concerned that he might forget and bring it back there. This is forbidden unless he brings his head and the majority of his body into the domain in which he is drinking, in which case the rabbis were not concerned that he will transfer the cup from one domain to the other. Because Rabbeinu Yonatan, the art school notes bring down, when the majority of a person's body is in the same domain as the water, he will be aware of the need to remain within that domain and not remove anything from it. V'chen begat, the Mishnah says, the same law applies to a wine press in regard to the laws of Maaser. The commentaries explain grapes that have been gathered but not fully processed into wine do not yet need to have Maaser separated from them. Although the rabbis prohibited eating or drinking from the grapes or the juice before tiding them for Maaser, they did permit snacking from them until the wine has been fully processed, which is when the Maaser obligation takes effect. And the commentaries give us the background. Under biblical law, one is obligated to separate Terumah and Maaser from the produce of Eretz Yisrael only once it has been fully processed. Until then, one may eat or drink from it without any restrictions. The rabbis decreed that one may not eat or drink before separating Maaser, even from unprocessed foods. However, they only prohibited regular consumption of unprocessed foods, not casual snacking. And snacking means eating just small amounts in a casual manner. So for this reason, when grapes are being made into wine, one may take a drink from the juice in the upper vat of the wine press, even though Maaser was not separated from the grapes before they were pressed. Now, wine was prepared using two vats, one above the other. The grapes were pressed in the upper vat, and the juice then ran off into the lower vat where it was held in storage. The processing is not complete until the juice flows into the lower vat, and since the grapes were harvested for the production of wine, they are not considered fully processed until they are pressed and the juice is in the lower vat of the wine press. Now, the Mishnah teaches that even drinking from the upper vat is permissible only when one is standing with his head and the majority of his body over the vat. If not, then drinking is forbidden because we are concerned that he might bring the wine from the vat to where most of his body is located, meaning next to the vat. Drinking next to the vat, not over it, is prohibited because it's considered a more regular manner of consumption and not snacking. Now, the Mishnah discusses the permissibility of taking water from a roof gutter or drain pipe while standing in the public domain. A person may stand in a public domain and catch water falling from a roof gutter within 10 tefachim off the ground. Now, since the water he is catching is already located in the airspace of the public domain, and the airspace of a public domain extends to a height of 10 tefachim, no change of domain takes place when he catches it. However, one may not press his lips or a cup against the end of the gutter in order to receive the water directly from it, because the gutter is seen as an extension of the roof, which is a private domain, since the gutter typically runs along the wall of the house within 3 tefachim of the roof line. It's considered an extension of the roof and therefore a private domain, and therefore receiving the water directly from it while standing in the public domain is considered a transfer between domains. Now, unlike catching water that is falling from a gutter, which is permissible within 10 tefachim off the ground, pressing a cup or one's mouth to the gutter is prohibited even at that height, despite the fact that the water, the gutter, and the individual are all in the airspace of the public domain, because a gutter that is within 3 tvachim of the roof line is considered an extension of the roof and is therefore a private domain, just like the roof. Uminat tzino mikol makom shoteh. However, one may drink in any manner from a drain pipe that juts out from the wall of the house. Now, in this case, the roof of the house slopes so that all of the water flows to one spot. At this spot, a hole is made in the area surrounding the roof into which a pipe is inserted. This pipe runs down the wall and extends out from the house so that the water falls away from the wall of the house. So that this pipe typically extends out more than 3 tvachim from the roof, the Rav points out, and therefore you'd be allowed to drink it from this drain pipe. Now, he may even press his lips or a container to the open end of the drain pipe and receive water directly from it, the commentaries say. Since the open end of such a pipe typically juts out some distance from the wall of the house, the drain pipe is not seen as an extension of the roof, and collecting water in this manner is not prohibited. Again, whoever can see the Mishnah inside with the notes, with the commentary, and with illustrations will be able to understand the Mishnah better. That is the end of Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin now discusses transferring an item from one private domain to another by way of a space that separates the two. Bo bereshut harabim. If there is a pit of water in a public domain, v'chuliato givoa 10 tvachim, and its embankment, the pile of earth surrounding the pit, is 10 tvachim high, chalon shel gabav, and there is a window in the house that overlooks the pit, mimal'in mena b'shabbat, we may draw water from the pit into the house on Shabbat, meaning one may draw water from the pit, which is a private domain, into the house, which is also a private domain, even though the water goes over the public domain that lies between the pit and the house. And the Rav explains the distance between the pit and the house, at least 4 tvachim, which is enough for it to be considered part of the public domain. Now, this is permitted because when one draws water from the pit, he must raise it higher than 10 tvachim in order to clear the embankment. So therefore travels through the airspace that is 10 tvachim above the ground of the public domain, which is an exempt area. Since he is taking the water from one private domain to the other through an exempt area, the transfer is permitted. Now, if the embankment would be less than 10 tvachim high and the bucket would go to the public domain, which extends up to 10 tvachim above the ground, the transfer would be forbidden because one may not transfer something from one private domain to another private domain to a public domain. But in the Mishnah's case, however, the bucket must be raised over the embankment, which is 10 tvachim high, before it is passed over the public domain. Now, the window of the house is also at least 10 tvachim from the ground, so the bucket only goes to the exempt area above the public domain, which makes the transfer permitted. Ashpa bereshut harabim givoa 10 tvachim. Similarly, if there is a trash heap in the public domain and it's 10 tvachim high, which is the minimum height of a private domain, chalon shel gabav shofchim letochah mayim b'shabbat. We may pour water onto it on Shabbat from a window that is above it. And the Ritba explains water or any other item. The Mishnah mentions water only because water is the most common item that is transferred from a window to a trash heap, but it's hu hadin similarly to any other item. Now, here, transferring the water is permitted because it goes from one private domain, the house, to another private domain, the trash heap, through the airspace that is more than 10 tvachim above the public domain, which is an exempt area. Now, this ruling applies only to a public trash heap that is not usually cleared away. If, however, it's a private heap, the rabbis banned throwing anything onto it from a private domain, even if the heap is 10 tvachim high, because they were concerned that the owner of the heap might remove some of the trash and reduce its height to less than 10 tvachim. Should that happen, the heap would be a karmelit, and transferring something from a private domain to a karmelit is forbidden. And people who had gotten into the habit of throwing objects onto the dump on Shabbat might not be aware of this, that he lowered the height, and they will continue doing what they have always done, even though it's now forbidden. So to prevent this, the rabbis decreed one may not throw anything onto a private trash heap, even if it's known to be more than 10 tvachim high, because again, the concern, the private owner might remove some garbage and lower the height. Therefore, it would only be allowed if it's a public trash heap that's not usually cleared away. That is Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have an Erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.